So thanks a lot. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining the seminar even when Christmas is approaching. So, and also thanks for not being completely a room full of men. So it's a little bit of variation in the gender, which is important. So thanks especially for that. So just a couple of words about myself. We have 1 hour, right? More or less. So we talk a little bit less to allow for Q&A. So I'm what is called in French a Chaire de Professeur Junior, so a junior professor chair in economics of artificial intelligence and innovation, which means that as a specialization, as a training, I'm an economist, which is, however, very much interested in the dynamics of technology. I've been so here in Nice, the University of Côte d'Azur, at GREDEG, which is my laboratory to which I'm related to. I have a team. One member is here, Taekyun, you see him there because we co-author one of the papers that I'm going to present today. But we are a nice team of 7 people, so you will hear about us more and more the more we go on with our research. As I said, I'm an economist, but I'm very much interested in technology, so my research is mostly dedicated to what you would call emerging digital technologies, which makes the topic of the research very much in line with Forum Numerica. So I've been working on the dynamics of the semiconductor industry and how artificial intelligence is changing design choices in the production of integrated circuits. I'm working on artificial intelligence and on the dynamics of the industry, so the concentration of market power and the entry or the exit of new companies across the whole stack of AI. But today I'm going to talk about another topic, which is robotics. However, it's robotics from an economist's viewpoint. So hopefully it's not so much hard to understand. So indeed, the idea is that among all the technologies that are shaping our digital economy, robotics is a key technology, and there is a key industry behind robotics. So why it is important? Because clearly the adoption of robots is affecting downstream or user industries in manufacturing. However, what is also true is that other industries are affecting robotics. So you also have that what is happening somewhere else in terms of technological development is reshaping the way in which robotics innovate and evolve. So on the one hand, you have somehow, you could study, if you want, how robots impact downstream industries. On the other hand, you could study how certain industries impact robotics. So this is what I'm trying to put together today, showing you 2 papers. One is already published, one is ongoing work, in which we study these 2 directions of evolution of robotic technology. As I said, I'm going to give you an economist perspective. So it's not very much on the very fine-grained detail of technological evolution, but usually as an economist of technology, I would focus on which are the economic forces that shape behaviors of actors in a particular technology. So for example, is it a matter of competition? Is it a matter of adoption? And so on and so forth. And usually what we do as economists, just to give you a little bit of introduction, we highlight trade-offs, meaning that what is that we have to give up if we want to pursue a certain direction. So if you want to innovate in this trajectory, maybe you have to give up on that. If you want to produce neuromorphic chips, then you might have to give up, I don't know, on speed or energy efficiency, which is not the case, but just to say that trade-offs are at work in many contexts in which you have technological evolution. And the other point is that, especially in the first paper, I'm going to give you mostly what we call a bird's-eye view. So it's something that happens on average in the industry. So I cannot make claim about this firm does that, the other firm does that, but it's sort of general patterns of what characterizes the economic application or uses or evolution related to robotics. So the first side of the story is how robots affect innovation. So the story is the following, and it's published in this paper that if you're interested, you can already scan and download with the QR code, which is called Robot Adoption and Product Innovation, which is published in one of the major journals in, let's say, innovation, science, and economics of technology, which is called Research Policy. And the idea there is that somehow all the people in social sciences that study robots, they usually are interested in the employment effect of automation. Okay, so are people gonna be replaced, substituted, or not? Are firms that adopt robots growing faster, becoming bigger, making more sales, and so on and so forth? The point that we were interested in, though, is that there is a lot of discussion about the fact that current robots, so new generations or new cohort of robotic technology, is very much also a sort of flexible type of technology. So you have robots combined with other enabling technologies like AI and sensors and put together in more complex cyber-physical systems. So there is an ongoing literature that suggests that despite the fact that robots are still a type of equipment, so a type of capital, investment, they have some unique features. And so they are a sort of, usually robots are process innovation, as we call it. So they are type of equipment that would make your processes more efficient, dynamic, and better organized or cheaper. However, modern contemporary robots, given all the connection with advanced and emerging digital technologies, they are expected to have also what we call enabling capabilities. So the idea that being so flexible, so malleable, so capable of changing structurally the way in which firms behave, they should spur innovation. Okay, so the idea is that, using an economic terms, robots should spur economies of variety, so should help firms to produce different varieties of products with different designs and so on and so forth. On the other hand, it's also true, though, that robots are still the last iteration of industrial automation technologies that we have seen since the 60s and the 70s. So you have this, let's say, double view. One set of people would tell you that modern robots would induce further innovation. They are enabling technologies, and others say like, no, they are still the same type of equipment, just a little bit better, a little bit more sophisticated. So our research question is that is it true? So is it the case that adopting robots spurs product innovation? So are firms that adopt robots innovating more, introducing new products, or not? We use let's say we are working mostly with industrial robots, so this is the ISO and International Federation of Robotics definition of industrial robots. And also, I mean, given that nowadays you cannot do anything without asking ChatGPT or the like, even though I don't like to do that, what we did is we asked a couple of AI systems what is the effect of robot adoption on innovation. Like imagine that you are an academic and both Perplexity AI and ChatGPT in some form they say like, yes, sure, that you have that, I don't know if I have a pointer here, but let's say robot adoption should enable companies to develop new product faster. Robot adoption will lead to the creation of more advanced and sophisticated products. Robots should enable new design, speeding up development cycles, and so on and so forth. Okay, so somehow AI chatbots believe that they don't believe because they're not intelligent, but they suggest that that's the case. What we do, we collect a data set. It's very hard to find, you should know in economics, firm level, very detailed data. So we collect firm level data that we could find, which is for Spanish manufacturing firms, that has a very long span of collection of data in a survey that goes on since the 1990s. And we do an econometric analysis in which we relate statistically. So we test the relationship between product innovation and robot adoption. And why we do that? Because there is a lot of studies in economics about robotization, but as a colleague of us says, we had more papers on robot than we had data points on robots, meaning that there is a lot of people talking about it, but really economists do not really understand much the details of robot technology. And we try to explain what we find, building a little bit on existing economic theory. What do we find? For our sample, in our case, so it's limited to the data that we have, the adoption of robots has a negative and persistent effect on product innovation. So this goes a little bit against what people would expect. Spoiler alert, that might be driven by the type of data or the type of sector that we look at, but at least is a different view than what is usually a little bit hype-driven expected in the industry. And the negative effect is stronger for larger, older, and low-tech firms, so non-high-tech firms. So, okay, by doing that, we contribute a lot of literature, but I will not focus very much on that. And actually, maybe better if I keep track of my time speaking. So what we had at our hand was this a survey on entrepreneurial strategies, which is a Spanish survey done yearly on 2,000 Spanish firms that are tracked over time. So it's a panel data, and these firms are asked about many things. I mean, how much sales they do, how much employees they do, which type of technology they have. Important for us, they are asked about industrial robot adoption. So many robots which are different from numerical control machines. So it's not just equipment, digital equipment in some form, but really industrial robots. And how many innovation they do. Okay, product innovation they do. That's a nice survey because it covers a large share of manufacturing employment. So you have all the large firms in Spain are included in manufacturing and a sample of small firms. And it's a very long sample because it goes from 1991 to 2016. First thing that we could do is to test the difference in certain features between the adopters and non-adopters of robots. So the idea is that, and this difference whether they are statistically significant or not. Well, so the point is that adopters of robots, they usually innovate more than non-adopters. They, both in numbers and in absolute terms, whether they do more innovation. They have more employees, so they are bigger. They do more investment in research and development. They invest more in machinery. They are usually partially owned by foreign firms or more internationalized firms. They also export more. So the robot adopters, they are kind of a league on their own, at least in this sample in Spain. They're more innovative, larger firms, more internationalized. Okay? And what we do what we call in economics, I don't know if you're familiar with that, we do an event study. An event study is an econometric regression in which you have a shock at a certain point. Okay, in our case, the shock, though, can happen for different firms in different time periods. So somehow it's used to try to identify causation. So usually with econometric analysis, you find correlations or co-movement of variables. But in our case, we could see what happens before and after the shock, where the shock is adoption of robots, or becoming a firm that adopts robots. And then we do several robustness checks because this type of analysis, they have a lot of stringent conditions for being considered scientifically robust. And then we split our analysis by size of firm, by age of firms, and by the type of industries in which they are. So that's a lot of work, but the model somehow is this one. So we regress product innovation by each single firm in any time period on firm-specific characteristics, so to remove from the variance, let's say, something that is unobservable from the firm level, time-specific features, so to remove effects of business cycles and so on and so forth, industry-specific effects, so that this effect on innovation might be related to the specific sub-market in which the firms are. And then these variables here, beta robot and beta robot, they are let's say, the dummy variables, so the fact that robotic adoption has happened in a certain period. And these two components, they measure, let's say, the contribution to product innovation by the fact that you were expecting to adopt a robot, so an anticipation effect, and what happens after you adopt a robot. So in a nutshell, so that we control for several features that characterize the firm, but in a nutshell, if you want to know the story, what happens is that after firms, on average, once again, so it's a sort of an average effect across the industry, after they adopt robots, the number of product innovations and the very fact of doing product innovation, we call the probability of innovation, but it's just yes, no, do they do it or not, in the follow-up periods decreases, okay? So we test this sort of specification with many type of alternative techniques, and I mean, I can show you later if you have questions, but somehow what we find as a, let's say, stable result is that product innovation after the introduction of robots becomes always, is reduced continuously. Okay? And this tends to be persistent over time. Here, every period is 4 years, so it's statistically significant for the majority of firms until 2 periods after, for sure. So you have that the number of product innovation and the probability to engage in further product innovation goes down for the following 8 years after having adopted robots. So this is kind of an alternative result from what you would expect, robots increasing product variety and so on and so forth. And the idea is that, and we test also whether this is driven by specific economic features of the firms. And indeed, we find that larger firms, those that have 200 plus employees, they reduce even further than the other type of firms their product innovation. The second and third tertile of firm, which means the middle-aged and older firms in our distribution, they have the stronger negative effect. So let's say established firms, they tend to have this negative impact from robotization, and also low-tech sectors and less robot-intensive industries, they also tend to have a strong impact. So just to wrap it up for you, the literature suggests that robots, they have an enabling effect on the economy, or at the firm level. They would induce firms to expand their variety of designs and products. They are a sort of, they should have an inducement effect on dynamism in terms of innovation for firms. What we find is the opposite, at least for manufacturing firms. Older, larger, less tech firms in less high-tech industries, actually they have a negative effect. When they adopt robots, they introduce less product innovation. Now, how do you rationalize that? So how do we explain this factor? So our main theory is the following, what we call an industry evolution mechanism. So let's put it plain like that. It's not robotization that reduces innovation. Robotization accelerates the fact that firms tend to prefer scaling up existing products rather than introducing new products. Or if you want, in economic terms, the robotization helps economies of scale rather than economies of scope. So you should know that in most of the industries, robotics, manufacturing, microchips, pharmaceutical, most of the industries, they tend to experience what is called an industry life cycle. The industry life cycle is that at the beginning of the industry, at the infancy of the industry, you have a lot of companies that enter, a lot of startups. So you have a lot of entry, okay? These companies, they introduce product innovation, new products, new designs. But then the more the industry grows, the more there is competition, the more the profit margins, let's say, shrink, so there is less money to do. So what happens that after having grown in terms of number of firms, most of the industry experience what is called a shakeout. There is a sudden drop in the number of firms, and those that survive, then they, let's say, wrap up the whole market, so they expand quantity production. So what happens as an industry evolves from many firms to shakeout to stabilization, firms have an incentive at the beginning to do product innovation, later on to do process innovation. So there is less variance later on than of products than in the beginning. So this is also what happens in our sample. So our theory is that this is also what happens in our theory, in our manufacturing markets in Spain. Just that robotization, by lowering the cost of production at scale, induces firms to focus on the set of products that they were already producing so that they do not introduce new variants of products. So somehow robotization is not the cause of less innovation, but is an accelerant of the evolution of the industry. And this we find that also because I did not show it here, but the maximum amount of investment by firms in equipment and product innovation occur at the same point. So somehow firms decide how much product innovation to do, and then they robotize, and then they, let's say, scale up production after that. And so that's the first explanation. So one explanation of the relative negative effect of robotization on product innovation is that it's not robots themselves, but robots are accelerating a process that is already ongoing, underlying most of the industries. The second explanation is that what we measure are not flexible robots. So what we are measuring actually are, from 1991 to 2016, still not very much contemporary dynamic robots that have capability to transform the way in which companies explore the product space. So usually, robots would increase innovation if their adoption would prevail, so if economies of variety would prevail over these economies of scope, as we say. In our case, instead, that's not the case. So the other explanation is that the robots that Spanish firm have adopted until now, they are not so advanced. So to conclude this first part, how robots affect innovation, as I told you, robots are capital goods. They are a type of process innovation, and increasingly capable to do many things. You see also in some of the rooms here is explained. I was sneak peeking at the lecture on robotics with Arduino just on the other door. So let's say we are talking about that now in this very building. The very flexibility of contemporary advanced robots suggests they should have enabling capabilities to induce innovation in adopting firms. Instead, we find that actually adopting robots lead to reduction of product innovation, mostly for larger, established, so older and non-high-tech firms. And we interpret that as an industry evolution story. It's not really robots' story. The story is that robots accelerate the preference for firms that expand their production given the lowering of costs that robot allows on a smaller set of products rather than introducing new variants. And this is persistent. Somehow it lasts for several years, so somehow suggests that could be something at work. So, okay, that's the first story. I hope are you still with me? More or less? Okay. So the first story that I wanted to show to you was indeed the idea that robots are important. Robots are important because they are adopted in downstream industries, manufacturing and also services now. So you have from robots to an impact downstream. This impact we found, at least in our case, a bit counterintuitive, goes against what usually the literature expects. Now let's look on the other side. The other side is innovation affecting robots. Okay? So the two studies are disconnected. I just put them together because we are trying to cover, let's say, the different direction in which you can study robotics and their economic and technological impacts. Okay? So the story instead that we are covering here is the following. So you might have seen that, if you follow the news, that there is a recent mega boom on robotics, whose interest somehow, so robots are always there, they're used inside companies, and the shipments increase over time, but there is an increasing interest in the combination of AI and robots. You know, when I started the very beginning no, it was not the very beginning of AI, but it was the very beginning of economists' interest in AI from, let's say, 2012 and the deep learning boom, etc. Social scientists conflated the robots and AI continuously. So there were all these crappy articles online about robots substituting people, the overlord taking over, etc. And if you study robotics or AI, you know that this was not the case, and this is not the case. So robots indeed is a physical piece of equipment. AI has been mostly intangible, so meaning software technology, even though it relies on physical compute and hardware. So the two things have gone a little bit in parallel, even with point of contact. But in the, I would say, last 2 years, for sure, there is a big boom of interest on how AI can be used in tandem with robotics. So this is a paper that Tae-Kyun, who sits there, and I are working on, and which we called When Robots Met Language, on a pun with the movie which was, now I even forgot, When Harry Met Sally, sorry, but just to make it a little bit more spicy. But so somehow there is a debate about that. And indeed, the idea is that, so somehow there is an increasing focus by researchers and media and practitioners on what is called embodied AI. So embodied AI, you know it better than me, but it's all the type of application of AI which is embodied or embedded in devices for a couple of reasons. First of all, because the technological advances of AI model themselves that now are more portable, they're more pruned, they're more embeddable if you want. And the other, it is because after many years of people talking about all the magic that AI could do as a software, turns out that nobody's yet making money with AI. So there is a lot of, I don't know if you saw, but there is at least a 600 billion investment gap in capital expenditure by tech giants that invested a lot in artificial intelligence, but nobody is making profits. So OpenAI is making revenues, Google is making revenues, but many of them are making losses also. In the end, they are not really, it's not really a profitable business for the moment. And of course, if you're a tech giant, you can bear this cost because you have large pockets, but for startups, you might have seen this in this industry life cycle story that I told you just before, applying also to AI, in which at a certain point you might have a big drop in AI startups. Anyway, so there is a big debate of whether actually AI is bringing economic returns. Clearly it's bringing technological returns, a lot of nice impacts, but nice use cases, but if you are a company, you need to make money with that, otherwise you go out of business. And so, given that AI as a software seems like not producing returns immediately or in the short term, a lot of companies started to pivot and say like, okay, maybe we can look at embedded AI. At the same time, you have the emergence of what are called visual language action models. Visual language action models are one step forward from vision language models, so models that connected, let's say, language models and perception and computer vision, which you're going to see is mostly, not only, but mostly pushed forward with strength by Google. And so there is an increasing debate of what are called robotic foundation models. As you have foundation models for language and multimodal, now it's increasingly explored whether this is applicable to the robotic domain. At the same time, as I told you, investors, so venture capital, VC stands for venture capital, start to realize that maybe there is not so much money to do in large language model all the time, so they started to put a lot of money in the humanoid robotics field. Humanoid robotics not necessarily driven by AI, but let's say this is just to tell you that there is an ongoing interest on the field. So is it a relevant topic? So if you listen, for example, for this guy, which is Vincent Van Hoek, which is, was the head of robotics at Google DeepMind until a month or two ago. He gave a keynote at the sort of developer conference of NVIDIA a few months ago, in which we said like the connection between LLMs and robotics turned out to be very deep, so deep that it's forcing us to rethink the very way in which robotics is done. Then you can tell me whether it is true or not. I'm just following the market trend here. And if you see, let's say, a bit of what is discussed in the field, this is a slide from the State of AI report, which is a very well-known document that tracks year by year the evolution in the technology and industry and market application and also government policy of AI. They point out that in 2021, OpenAI decided to disband its robotics research team just to bring it back in 2024 because now they don't want to be lagging behind other efforts by other companies. So what we did, we just track a little bit what, so for us as a social scientist, it is very interesting to check the particular path that this type of technological innovation is taking. So we're not focusing very much on the technical specificities on a given model, but let's say, is there a pattern or is there a trajectory that is followed? Because we are very much interested in what we call technological trajectories, so the specific evolutions that the technology follows. And so if you follow what Google has been doing, so they say like, okay, you know, there are at least 3 domains of conventional robotics. You have perception, you have planning, and you have actuation, and you have either no AI in that, or you had some part of that with AI, mostly with reinforcement learning. And then Google introduced this model, which they called say-can. So they started to replace these domains with LLMs. Okay? So with say-can, they substitute the planning with an LLM. Then they had the inner monologue paper in which they substitute the perception with a VLM, so a visual language model. Then they had another paper called Code as Policies in which they introduced Code-LM, which is another LM to deal with the actuation phase of robots, which replaced the standard controllers. Then you have, so what Google has been doing is to separate the different functions that enables robot to work, and one after the other, put an LLM into that. Okay, so substitute the standard algorithm and systems with LLMs. Then, what they started to do, they started to integrate the pieces. Okay, so if you look at Palm-E, is the LLM in which they fuse the perception and the planning. Okay, so there is an LLM and a vision encoder, all in a sort of in a transformer architecture. And then they have RT1, in which instead they connected, so they created an end-to-end transformer from vision to planning and actuation, and then more recently RT2, in which they combine all the things together. So for us it's interesting because this is a process of, so somehow it's what we would call a sort of redomaining. So all the processes in a certain technologies are brought under a different logic. Okay, so once again, instead of doing digital computation or compute, you would do analog. What you would have to do, you would have to translate every principle under a different logic. This is somehow what Google and many other actors are doing. They're bringing problem of robotics into the semantic space. And this somehow, it's a very interesting development for a couple of reasons. First, because it might open up windows for, let's say, changing the trajectory of innovation of robotics. Okay? And second, because if this is a breakthrough kind of innovation, a breakthrough kind of change, like a sort of profound change, then it changes the market as well. So it changes who innovates in the field. So this stuff is, the field of visual language model is not new, but this VLAs is relatively recent, so much that I would say, and you can correct me, that the older paper that we have is 2022, 23, I think. So this is a 2 years, 3 years old, 2 years old field, okay? The specific VLA domain or robotic foundation models. And so it's a little, so as we, as a social scientist, we capture this trend and we say like, okay, can we like map it, see where is it going, trying to see where could be potential evolution of this subfield of the combination and joint work of AI and robotics. And, but it is a little bit of a problem. So remember the other paper, just in order to understand whether robotics lead to innovation, I had data for 20 years. So I could track what firms were doing on a relatively long time period. In this case, we have 1 year and a half, 2 years to track what is happening. What we did, we did a couple of things, but we had to find a way to at least to see the nascent dynamics, so to see the dynamics as they are ongoing. And our questions of interest are of two kinds. So we organized the studies in two parts. One is a scientometric part. Do you know what is scientometric? Okay, so somebody nods. For those that do not know, is the study of science dynamics. So you would study publications and who cites whom in which fields. So there is a tracking of scientific activity in some form. Apologies if it is too much cut with an axe as a definition, but just to give an idea. And in this context, well, so that's the first part. We are interested in the science of VLA, and second, we are interested in the firm and strategy part. For the first part, the question mostly is who and how is developing this technology, okay? So is it public institution? Is it universities? Is it private companies? With which shares? Like with what's the weight of the actors into that? And is this gonna be a new technological trajectory? How pervasive is gonna be? For the strategy part, instead, we are interested in another thing, that is so how is this field pushed forward? So who is the protagonist, or one or many, that are advancing VLA technology? For example, mostly robotics has been advanced by hardware firm, if you want, so robotics mostly hardware firms. But is it still the case, or are we going to see more software firms being involved in robotics? Do the tech leaders from the private side, read in this case Google, do they have any specific strategy to try to lock in on themselves this technology, to try to benefit from them, or not? And are these strategies similar to what we have seen somewhere else, or not? So this is still, as I told you, still is ongoing work. So that's, we try to extract as much as we could from very little information. And what we did is the following. So we had a very simple approach. So we screened a little bit the literature for overviews of the field, like structural literature reviews, etc. We found a nice paper from Ma et al. And co-authors from 2024, which is a review of the literature on VLA, or visual language action models, and which somehow organizes the paper that are related to VLA in different classes: pre-training, control policy, and task planner. So you see there is a ChatGPT for robotics, or inner monologue, RoboCat, RT, so some of the things that I even mentioned before in the timeline that I showed to you. And so for us, this is a sort of our seed sample of papers that are relevant to VLA, okay? So there are 61 papers cited in this review. We took these papers, we collected the papers, and then we collected all the forward citations, so all the papers that cite these 61s, okay? So the forward citation, somehow it tells you how the knowledge spills over forward, okay? So if I write a paper and I cite Tai Kuhn paper, mine is a forward citation, or he has a forward citation that points to me that cite him. Okay, so we have 5,051 papers that we collected from OpenAlex. We had to clean them a bit because OpenAlex is a bit messy somehow. And we did for the moment, we just did a bit of descriptive evidence. So what we did, we just plotted the number of papers by country, by private actors, by public actors, and by field. So you have all these papers, you have 5,000 papers, and you can see what's the share of the things. So mostly what we find is that in terms of countries, of course, but as often it happens, the technology is spearheaded by the US. So in all the cases, we have the dynamics, so we have the descriptives for the seed papers, so for the 61 papers that somehow bounds the field. It's an arbitrary bound, okay, but we couldn't do, I mean, that's a decision of the researchers. We could have taken some other papers, but we found that was covering nicely the field. So you have the descriptive for the seed papers and the descriptives for the forward citations. So when you look at the forward citation, US papers published by actors that are based in the US still are the major ones, but there is a catching up in China. You will see the Chinese catching up is really the constant that we find here. So if you look at private actors, main actor that publishes in VLA is Google, and then followed by tech giants, of course. Once again, they have the chance to combine different fields and use these economies of scope because they have resources to be active in different domains. But then you have that even though Google, Meta, and Microsoft lead also in the forward paper, so in the citing paper, you have that Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba are catching up. If you look at public actors, same story. So you have Stanford, Berkeley, MIT that lead in the seed paper. They also lead in the follow-up paper. But for example, the first actor in publishing papers that cite the original seed one is the Tsinghua University. So is China catching up also there. And then we also, since OpenAlex classifies the papers in field, so the paper could be computer science, biology, economics, and whatever, we could have a sort of broad applicability of this knowledge in different fields. And most of these papers are still in computer science, but then you see that already the very first round of citations, it already is on papers that are classified as engineering, medicine, and also some social science. So somehow there is somehow an idea that this field can have applications that are going beyond robotics. So this is very, very rough. Okay, this is very rough. But what we wanted to capture, so we wanted to capture the evolution of the technology in the making as it happens. Most important for us is that interesting dynamic on which we need to reflect a little bit is the fact that on VLAs, the key papers or the seed papers were mostly published by either private actors, once again Google and the likes, or private public joint papers, so some researcher at Meta and I don't know, Berkeley University. And then if you look at the forward citation, papers that cite the original one that we selected, most of them, they are published by people in universities. Of course, there is a big role of Chinese that are affiliated to major universities. But here, what we started to reflect upon is whether, so do you know where? The Bell Labs. Okay, so there is also somebody nodding. If you don't, so the Bell Labs was the corporate research laboratory of AT&T, which was the American telecommunication and the phone company, let's say, American Telecom. The Bell Labs are an incredibly interesting case study for innovation. There is even a book which is called The Idea Factory, which is very interesting because the Bell Labs, they had Shockley that invented the transistor, besides being a racist and a misogynist, but he also won a Nobel Prize. So they had Shannon, so information theory was developed there. They had the first satellite communication set up there. Of course, the transistor was invented there because you know that the first application of transistor was for hearing aids. So of course it makes sense that the telephone company wanted to develop a miniaturized technology for helping their main business. But why am I telling you that? Because there was a phase in American innovation in which a lot of basic research was done inside corporate labs. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? So I am a big and strong supporter of basic research done in universities. But somehow there were cases in which large enough companies, a company with large enough size, infrastructural company like the telephone company, could finance an advanced technology or a series of technology doing basic research in-house, and then this basic research would spill over back to the public sector. And here, the theory that we have and we are starting to think about is whether DeepMind is a little bit the Bell Labs 2.0. So you know that DeepMind got the Nobel Prize for AlphaFold, but they're also working on these kind of things. So what is happening is that Google is so big that they allow themselves to behave like a university. And indeed, there is a couple of research. One is from a very nice colleague, Cecilia Ricap, a very good colleague, who has been trying to identify the feature of the tech giants, how do they behave in the tech markets, like at Amazon more as a platform, or Meta more as a other thing. And Google usually is being labeled the university strategy. So they try to be behave as very much as the Bell Labs were behaving. So one of our findings somehow is that we might see a re-emergence of this corporate innovation regime, which is important because if you are the government, you might want to see what to support, what not support, so it has societal implication. Finally, and I go towards closing, I think, we need to move from science to strategy. I told you that there is also a strategy part in what we want to analyze. And the idea is that, okay, how are these developments in VLA happening? And the idea is that as more and more function of robotics are brought under the semantic technology, so brought under LLMs, you have this sort of tendency of LLM becoming what in business are called a dominant design. So the major dominant architecture of how a technology is designed. Okay? It doesn't have to be persistent, it doesn't have to be permanent, but usually, so the fact that a phone is rectangular with touchscreen is the dominant design of the phone. The fact that the car has an engine on its front rather than its back, because it was experimented in the 20th century, is the dominant design of a car. The fact that an airplane has a certain shape is the dominant design of the plane. For software, it's much harder, but somehow the discussion is whether transformer architectures are becoming, also LLMs are becoming the dominant design in AI, and thus in robotics now. Why it is important? Because when a dominant design is established, it's very hard for new companies to enter the market. So if you are already in the market, you gain a lot of returns. Okay? So that's usually the strategy that dominant companies try to pursue in order to conquer the market. So strategically occupy a market. And what would you do to conquer the market if you're, let's say, if we're talking about the future VLA market? Well, without looking at the slide, first, I would, so given this is a domain that requires a lot of data, first I would try to centralize all the collection of data, and then when I have all of data and I am the gatekeeper of the data, then I would even give the model out for free so that everybody uses it, but then it's stuck to me. And what is happening is that very recently, Google led an initiative which is OpenX embodiment, because in this VLA or robotics field, the problem is that the embodiments, so the things that robots can do, are many, various, and heterogeneous. So it's so you would have to train a model for a specific task. And instead, if you want to model generalist policies, which was not done until now, you would need a lot of heterogeneous data. So what is Google doing is creating a sort of, not a foundation, but an organization, a project which is called OpenX Embodiment, with all these universities and companies involved, in which everybody shares the data that they have to train their robots. Okay, you create a common pool, and you are the gatekeeper. And then what you do, if you look at RT2, that I show you before on the timeline, this was based on a Google LLM that now it was not Bard, but was Palm. And then instead, they just, not scrapped that, but they just made a new model, which is an open VLA, so open source, which is based on Llama 2. Okay? Even though I saw yesterday on LinkedIn that they started to discuss whether now they would put Gemini 2 to power their VLAs. But so the idea is that Google is clearly pursuing a strategy of accumulation of data, making all the actors that develop VLA technology complementors, meaning those that just are appendices to Google. And when they do that, then just to give the model for free, so that then, like when they give you the ebook reader for free, so that you have to read Mobi or EPUB, so that you are stuck to the standard. So that is what is happening in the industry. The last thing that is happening is that the startups, I told you, so there is a lot of software and hardware startups are entering into the market, but there is already, after 1.5 years, signs that the industry is consolidating. So So these are all the companies that either work on humanoid robotics or VLA, so Sanctuary AI, Figure, Covariant, Agility Robotics, Intrinsic, and either they are collaborating with AI companies, or they are bought by tech giants, or they are spun off by tech giants. So Intrinsic is owned by Alphabet, this Aptronic, and then there is another one, they are not bought, but they're like in this sort of financial ties, very strong with NVIDIA, and so on and so forth. So you see that bringing robotics under language models is potentially a breakthrough in the field because somehow it changes the logic of how robotics work. It opens room for software rather than hardware companies to make their way into the field. The science is evolving rather quick. Even in a year, we could capture some dynamics with Google at the forefront, which clearly has a strategy of locking in the market on itself, given the expectation of potential revenues that are not coming from AI software alone. And even the boom in startups that are talking about and working on these domains, they are already a bit under the umbrella of tech giants. So the last slide is that, okay, so I just told you, there are many interesting things in the socio-technical dynamics related to that. We now plan to extend this analysis to make it a little bit more sophisticated and also to expand the horizon of papers. But so, to wrap up, robots are a technology or a set of technologies. They have societal implications. So you could try to capture that, and it's important to do that because it has consequences for how markets evolve, how governments design policies. But the society and how it allocates resources on certain directions affects how robotics evolve. And we have seen that the change in the logic of how robotics works going under visual language action models can shape the trajectory of robotics as well. So I wanted to stress somehow that tech and society, they are in a double-tied, let's say, binded prisoners sort of relationship, of interrelationship dynamics. And I think that there is a lot of nice finding and insights if people that study the hard side of technology and in depth, and the social scientists that are interested very much on this sort of bird's-eye view, then collaborate together. So, and with that, thanks a lot. That's the logo of my chair, if you want to follow us in some form, which is called Chaire because it's chair in AI and economics. And yeah, thanks a lot for your attention. And if you have any questions, please